Cliff Richard finally talks about Elvis Presley. Cliff Richard was born with the name Harry Roger Webb on October 14, 1940, in a city called Lucknow, which was part of British India at the time. Cliff Richard's life started out in a really complicated place in history. He was born in a part of India that was ruled by Britain, and his whole family moved back to England in 1948 after India became its own free country. They settled in a small town called Cheshunt in Hertfordshire, and the family didn't have a lot of money, so Cliff grew up without many fancy things. But even when he was little, young Harry Webb really loved music and performing. He especially looked up to American rock and roll stars like Elvis Presley, Little Richard, and Buddy Holly. These heroes would one day push him to become the UK's very own version of the American rock stars everyone was going crazy over. In 1958, he picked the stage name Cliff Richard because it made people think of something strong, like a cliff, and it also gave a nod to Little Richard, and he burst onto the British music scene with his band called the Drifters, which later got renamed the Shadows. Their very first single, Move It, is often called the first real British rock and roll song. It got all the way to number 2 on the UK singles chart and told everyone that something new and exciting had arrived. Cliff's cool looks, young energy, and guitar-heavy style made him the face of teenage rebellion in a Britain that was still pretty old-fashioned after the war. He was Britain's very first rock star, and he would keep that title and grow even bigger as he got older and his music got better. All through the 1960s, Cliff Richard put out a bunch of hit songs like Living Doll, The Young Ones, Summer Holiday, and Bachelor Boy, and all of them became songs people never forgot. He also got into movies, starring in fun musical films that his fans loved and that made him even more of a household name. Even when the Beatles showed up and the British music scene exploded, Cliff Richard stayed popular and kept going strong. Instead of getting left behind when music kept changing, Cliff changed too. In the 1970s, he went from being a teen idol to a more grown-up artist making deeper and more modern music. Songs like Devil Woman, We Don't Talk Anymore, and Wired for Sound showed he wasn't afraid to try new things, including disco and synthpop. His ability to keep reinventing himself while still sounding like himself let him stay successful across many different generations of fans. A man with very deep beliefs, Cliff Richard became a serious Christian in the mid-1960s. His faith became one of the most important parts of who he was, shaping both how he lived and what kind of music he made. He often recorded songs about God and religion and was admired for not giving up his values even in the wild world of show business. He walked away from the party lifestyle and instead kept a clean and wholesome image. His 1979 Christmas single, Mary's Boy Child, Oh My Lord, with Boney M., along with other faith-based songs, showed just how serious he was about what he believed in. His choice to stay single and not have kids also made a lot of news, but he always handled those nosy questions with class and calm. Cliff Richard has long said that he felt called to live a life of service and independence, and many of his fans have always respected him for living life exactly the way he wanted to. On top of being huge in the UK, Cliff Richard became famous all around the world, with loyal fans in places like Australia, South Africa, and all across Europe. He has sold more than 250 million records around the world, making him one of the best-selling music artists who ever lived. His record collection is unmatched when it comes to the UK charts. He is the only artist ever to have a #1 song in 5 decades in a row, from the 1950s all the way through the 1990s. Britain officially recognized how much he meant to the country when he was knighted in 1995, making him the very first rock star to ever receive that honor. He was also given the Order of the British Empire, known as the OBE, back in 1980. These awards weren't just for his music, but also for all the charity work and giving back he has done over the years, supporting causes like HIV and AIDS awareness and helping kids in need. Even with all those decades of fame and the love of so many people, Cliff Richard went through maybe the hardest time of his life in 2014 when someone made false accusations of sexual misconduct against him. Those accusations led to a big, very public police investigation and a media storm that caused him an enormous amount of pain and stress. In 2016, the Crown Prosecution Service said there wasn't enough evidence to do anything about it, and Richard was completely cleared of everything. Instead of hiding away, Cliff fought back. He won a big and very public lawsuit against the BBC for the way they covered the investigation and became a strong voice for press accountability and the rights of people who are being investigated. His dignity and strength in that really tough time only made his fans and fellow artists respect and admire him even more. Cliff Richard still performs and releases music even now that he's in his 80s, with a voice and a stage presence that makes you forget how old he is. He has never officially retired, and his 2020 album Music, The Air That I Breathe, proved he was still very much relevant, landing in the UK top 5. His Christmas releases every year are still something fans get excited about, and his tours are still packed with longtime fans and brand new ones too. Cliff Richard's personal life has always been something fans and reporters found quietly fascinating, especially because of the big personal sacrifices he made to protect and grow his career in show business. One of the things that shaped him most deeply as a young adult was losing his dad, Roger Webb, who passed away in 1961, at just 56 years old. At that time, Cliff was only 21 years old and was just starting to climb to the top of the music world. Losing his father hit him really hard. In later years, Richard said with a lot of sadness that his dad died way too young and had tragically never gotten to see the most successful and celebrated parts of his son's amazing career. During his father's illness, Cliff said that the two of them had grown really close, showing a rare soft and emotional side beneath the shiny public image of the young star. His dad's death didn't just leave a hole in his heart, it also put a quiet weight on Cliff's shoulders as he started to feel like it was his job to take care of his mom and sisters, an emotional and financial responsibility that would end up influencing a lot of his choices later in life, including choices about love and relationships. His mom, Dorothy Webb, would go on to live a long life, but she faced her own tough times later on. She passed away in October 2007 at the age of 87 after battling Alzheimer's disease for 10 whole years. Watching his beloved mom slowly fade away over a decade was incredibly painful for Cliff and everyone in his family. In an open and honest interview in 2006, he talked about how emotionally exhausting it had been to deal with her condition, sharing how much stress and heartbreak he and his sisters went through as they cared for her. Watching her memory and sense of self slowly disappear was a harsh reminder of how fragile life really is, and once again put Cliff in the role of family caretaker, a role he took on with all the love he had. All throughout his life, Cliff Richard has stayed a lifelong bachelor, and that personal choice was shaped by both his deep emotional ties to his family and the demands that came with being a huge star. One of the earliest windows into that inner struggle came through a touching 3-page letter he wrote in October 1961 to his first serious girlfriend, an Australian-born dancer named Dilea Wixes. The two had been together for about 18 months, and Wixes had hoped their relationship might lead to marriage. But Cliff, who was right on the edge of becoming internationally famous, made the painful decision to end things. In the letter, which only became public in April 2010 after Wixes passed away from cancer, Cliff explained his thinking with heartbreaking honesty. Being a pop singer, he said, meant he had to give up one priceless thing, the right to any lasting relationship with any special girl. He admitted that he had to make what he called probably one of the biggest decisions he would ever make and recognized how much it might hurt her. He also talked about how much his mom and sisters were depending on him after his dad's death, making clear that he couldn't walk away from them or his rising career. He told her he had showbiz in his blood and would be lost without it, and urged her to find someone who could love her in a way he felt he just couldn't. The letter showed the real emotional cost of fame and how it so often came at the expense of personal happiness. After her death in 2010 at age 71, her brother Graham Wixes described how deeply the breakup had hurt Dilea and called Cliff a very pleasant man, suggesting there were no hard feelings, just a lingering sadness. About a year after breaking up with Wixes, Richard had a short romance with an English actress named Una Stubbs, who was known for being charming and full of life. Though it didn't last long, the relationship hinted at Cliff's ongoing struggle to find lasting love while his fame kept growing. Later in the 1960s, he was linked romantically to a dancer named Jackie Irving, who he described as utterly beautiful. For a while, the two were said to be inseparable, which suggested that Cliff might have been seriously thinking about a future with her. But the relationship came to an end, and Irving later married British pop singer Adam Faith. Once again, someone who could have been a life partner slipped away as Cliff kept walking his path of dedication to music. The 1980s brought one of the most talked about and interesting chapters of Cliff's love life. His relationship with the famous British tennis star Sue Barker, who had won the French Open and made it to the semifinals at Wimbledon. Their relationship got a lot of media attention, especially after Cliff was spotted flying all the way to Denmark just to watch her play tennis. The two were also photographed holding hands and looking very much in love at Wimbledon, which only added more fuel to the rumors that an engagement might be coming. In interviews from those days, Cliff was pretty open about how he felt. In a February 1983 interview, he said he was seeing Sue and that she was the only girl he wanted to see at that time, and that if marriage came around, he would be all for it. Those words got people buzzing about whether the pop star was finally ready to settle down. But by September of that same year, Cliff had pulled back from any big plans, saying that getting married wasn't something he absolutely had to do, and neither was being a father, but that one day he'd like to have a family. Even though they clearly cared about each other, the relationship never turned into a marriage. In 2008, looking back on that time, Cliff admitted he had seriously thought about proposing to Barker, but in the end realized he didn't love her quite enough to commit the rest of his life to her. Sue Barker herself was always classy about the whole thing, and once said that she loved him and thought he was great and that they loved each other. Even after their romance ended and Barker moved on to a new relationship with tennis player Stephen Shaw, Cliff stayed on good terms with her and said they had a mutual respect for each other, and that meant a lot to him. When people asked why he had never gotten married, Cliff answered with real honesty and reflection. He said he had had a few false alarms and had been in love, but that marriage is a huge commitment and being an artist takes up so much of your time. Those words sum up the central struggle of his personal life, a real desire for love and closeness, always being balanced against an even stronger sense of duty to his career, his family, and his fans. He also shared that he had once been in love with singer and actress Olivia Newton-John back in the early 1970s, a time when a lot of guys, he joked, were completely crazy about her. But unfortunately for Cliff, Olivia was engaged to someone else, and he admitted with a little bit of regret that he was afraid he had lost his chance. For a long time, fans of both Cliff Richard and Elvis Presley had wondered just how deep Cliff's admiration for the king of rock and roll really was, and how much Elvis had truly shaped his life and career. Even though he had brought up Elvis's name in interviews here and there over the years, Cliff Richard had always stayed pretty quiet about the American legend in any real detail, until now. In a rare and emotional moment of openness, Sir Cliff Richard has finally talked publicly and in real depth about how deeply Elvis affected him, not just as a musician, but as a young guy trying to figure out who he was in a music world that was changing fast. Cliff, who came onto the scene in the late 1950s as Britain's answer to Elvis Presley, admitted that his whole career was shaped by watching Elvis explode onto the scene in the United States. He said he was completely mesmerized, remembering the first time he ever heard Elvis sing. He said it felt like the whole world just stopped and that he had never heard anything like that voice before. It had soul, confidence, and a raw kind of energy that was totally new to him. Cliff went on to talk about how, as a teenager growing up in post-war England, hearing Elvis's music on the radio lit a fire inside him that he didn't even know was there.